In today's video, we're going to be installing smart heating controls in my new house. And this time, we're going to be taking a look at Tado. And I'd like to say a massive thank you to Tado for sending me this over to review. Just to be fully clear, Tado have sent me all this kit free of charge to test out and try out, but they haven't paid me to make this video and they haven't told me anything to say. However, just to be completely clear, the video does have the include paid promotion thing enabled, so that include paid promotion basically means they've sent this free of charge to try out, just so I can make a video. So yeah, we're going to be trying out Tado. If you've watched my channel for a while, you'll have seen that I've tried out a bunch of different smart heating control systems over the years. But for my new house, I specifically wanted to use Tado because I wanted a system with smart radiator valves. Now the reason I've done this is in comparison to my previous place, which was a relatively small flat with no real insulation between the rooms, this house is obviously a lot bigger and it has a lot of insulation between the rooms, so all the internal walls are very well insulated, as are the floors between floors of the house. So that means that each room can very much contain its own heat, and it makes these smart radiator valves pretty useful because I'll actually be able to adjust the temperature between rooms. Additionally, with the way this house faces, the front of the house gets the sun during the day and during the morning and into the early afternoon, and then the back of the house gets the sun in the evening. And that can make quite a big temperature difference between the front of the house and the back of the house throughout the day. So having a system of smart radiator valves will allow me to very easily set the temperature in all the rooms and keep all the rooms consistently heated to the right temperature. It'll also let me just slightly adjust the temperature between different rooms. Now with these sorts of systems, what you shouldn't be doing is installing these on all your radiators and then just turning rooms completely off and then only heating a few rooms at a time. If you do that, you end up with just heat loss between different rooms in your house. It also means your boiler isn't running very efficiently because what's happening is it's not able to dissipate the heat it's generating into the rooms, and then it can cause issues because the boiler doesn't condense. So you shouldn't be using this sort of system to completely shut off radiators. But what it'll be great for is letting you just adjust room temperatures a little bit. For example, my bedroom. When I wake up in the morning, I want to get up into nice warm rooms, so when I'm getting up, getting in the shower, coming out the shower, that the room is nice and warm. However, I personally cannot sleep in a room that is remotely hot. So in the evening, I'd much rather the bedroom was a little bit cooler so that I can easily get to sleep. But I don't want the entire house to be cool in the evening. So with this system, what I can very easily do is set it up so that the whole house is kept to one temperature during the day, and then in the evening, the bedroom and say the ensuite can just turn the temperature down a little bit and make the bedroom a bit cooler into the evening. So it should just be a really, really useful system just to have that completely fine-grained control to get more consistent temperatures throughout and allow me to slightly vary the temperature between rooms just by a couple of degrees or so. So in this video what we'll do is we'll talk about the system, talk about all the hardware we've got, take it all out, set it up, get it installed, and we'll talk about how I found it. When it comes to buying Tado, you'll find there's a couple of different versions of it. They do the wired systems and the wireless systems. And when they say wired or wireless, what that's referring to is how the individual room thermostats connect back to your boiler. The wired thermostats I have here are designed for situations where you have thermostats in your rooms that are wired directly back to the boiler. On the other hand, the wireless kits are for systems where you have a wireless thermostat, so the thermostat that's in your room is a completely wireless battery operated device, and then there's a wireless receiver box that would connect to your boiler, usually located directly next to the boiler, and that receives the signal from the thermostat to control the boiler. If you replace an existing system, it's probably a bit best just to go for whatever you've already got. If you've already got wired thermostats, get the wired kit because you can just directly swap your existing thermostats. However, if you've already got a wireless thermostat, then you may as well buy the wireless kit. The other consideration is hot water control. If you have a combi boiler like I do, then the wired thermostat kits are absolutely fine. However, if you have a system with a hot water cylinder, you'll need your Tado to also be able to control your hot water schedule. That isn't possible with the wired thermostats, so in that case you need to buy a wireless Tado kit, connect the wireless receiver to your boiler for both hot water and heating control, and then you use the wireless thermostats in the rooms. If you're familiar with heating controls, it's a fairly easy process to figure out what you need and just buy it all. However, if not, Tado do have a couple of widgets on their website you can use to kind of pick what you've got and it'll kind of recommend products. And equally, you can also email them. I did actually test this out before this video. You can email them, sort of mention the system you've got, send pictures, send model numbers, and they are actually pretty helpful, and they did actually kind of recommend the correct products and say, right, this is what you need. So yeah, that's also a very good option if you're kind of unsure of what you need for your system. So when it comes to my current heating setup, it's basically the sort of thing you'd get in most UK new builds, even down to the programmers. They're all very similar between most UK new build houses. What I have is an Ideal Logic Combi ESP boiler. So that's the combi boiler, and it's controlled by these room programmers. And these are made by Danfoss. They're not terrible. I mean, compared to most of these are actually quite nice in that they have a decent menu and user interface. They're not one of those stupid things with little buttons and little blinky lights that you can never figure out. But they're not smart in any way, and I really want to have the individual room control and smart control. And what this house also has is 2 separate heating zones. In this house, it's a little bit weird. Most of the time with heating zones, you'll have, say, a downstairs zone and an upstairs zone. What this house has is a whole house zone except for this single bedroom, and then a zone that is just this one bedroom. The logic from that, according to the builders, is that this bedroom is above the garage and therefore it might not be as hot as the other rooms, which is a reasonable excuse, but equally it now just makes it completely awkward that I've now got a separate heating zone as well, which is the other reason I want to use Tado, to kind of get everything into one central control panel rather than having 2 separate programmers. So what that means is in this house I have 2 of these room programmers, or room thermostats. One of them controls just this room, one of them controls the whole house, and that one is in the downstairs hallway. And both of these room thermostats are hardwired back to the boiler. So behind each of these is a cable that runs directly down to the boiler. Therefore, to replace these, we're going to be using the Tado wired thermostats. So what we'll do now is we'll jump in over to the table, take a look at the hardware we'll be using, talk about it, and then we'll get it installed. So in terms of the hardware we'll be installing, as we can see here, I've gone for the wired Tado thermostats. And I've got 2 of them. One to replace the downstairs or the whole house zone, and one to replace the thermostat that just controls this one room. If you've only got a single heating zone, of course, all you're going to need is 1 room thermostat and then your radiator valves, but because I have 2 heating zones, I'll need a thermostat to replace each zone. If you have even more than 2 heating zones, you would need essentially enough room thermostats, wired thermostats, to replace each of your room programmers. We've also got the radiator valves. We'll take a look at these later. Essentially, you just need to really buy enough for all the radiators you want to control. For my setup here, I've gone for basically enough to put TRVs on every single radiator in the house, just so I can have complete control and visibility of all the temperatures. But there's nothing making you having to do that from the start. You could very easily just go for even just a thermostat on its own and then add the radiator valves, or just put radiator valves on the rooms that you want individual control on, and then just put standard TRVs on your other radiators. You don't have to go all out from the start. So with the thermostats, as we can see, we have 2 wired room thermostats. But you can see they are slightly different boxes. That's because one of these is the wired thermostat starter kit, and the other one is just the add-on thermostat. So that's quite important to bear in mind if you're buying this. The starter kits include the thermostat and the internet bridge you need to use to connect this to the network. The add-on thermostats don't. So if you're installing Tado, you need to buy at least 1 starter kit, and then after that you can just buy the add-on room thermostats, because you do need that internet bridge. So what we'll do now is we'll move the add-on thermostat out of the way for now, because we won't really need that. That's the exact same thing that comes in this box. And then we'll take a look at what comes in the starter kit. So if we open up the box, the first thing we'll see is the thermostat. This has a QR code and various sort of codes to set it up, so I'll just cover that up for safety. But yep, we've got the actual room thermostat itself we'll take a look at in a minute. Then under here you get some screws and fixings and some sticky pads to sort of fix it onto the wall. And then you get these stickers here that actually look quite interesting. Essentially, they're little stickers you can wrap around the wires to label them. Which means when you're, say, taking your existing thermostat off the wall, you can actually use these to label up the wires that you're taking out of your old thermostat, which may at least make it easier when you're putting the new one on, you don't get them mixed up. So we'll talk about that later. I might not use these, but it is useful to get these in the box. It's a nice little addition. And then if you take this cardboard out here, under here we then get the installation guide. There's 2 separate installation guides. The first one is for sort of DIYers or people who are a bit more inexperienced. And essentially the idea is that you install the app, you set it up using these instructions, and then all the instructions are provided to you through the app as a very easy to use wizard. The next set of instructions you get are the manuals for professional installers, and these kind of are the same idea, but they're just designed for people who are a bit more experienced installing heating controls. So they won't sort of hold your hand as much, they're kind of just the basic facts you need to know to install it. So we can take a look at these. They kind of just explain how to set up the internet bridge, how to get it all paired, and then just some very basic wiring diagrams. So these are potentially good if you're already familiar with installing heating controls. You don't need your hand completely held, you kind of just want to know the basic facts on how to get this connected up. And they come in a bunch of different languages. And then underneath that, you get the internet bridge. So this is the difference between the starter kit and just the add-on thermostats. You get the internet bridge, which is a basic little hub type device. It plugs in over micro USB for power and Ethernet to connect into your router. So you'll plug that into your router, And then all the various Tado devices around your house will connect to this to bridge it onto the network. You get a few other bits with it as well. You get an Ethernet cable and a USB power cable. And then you also get a USB power supply, so a little USB wall power supply with various ends for different countries, so you can use that to power your internet bridge. Don't think there's anything else really under here, just some basic regulatory bits of paperwork that you probably will never need ever. So yeah, that's what comes in the starter kit for the wired thermostat. So now here we have the Tado wired thermostat itself. It's a fairly neat little thing. It looked pretty neat and unobtrusive on the wall, which is nice. And if we open that up, what you'll see is on the outside it's fairly plain, but if we open it up, we'll see inside. So on the back here, this will kind of come off the back plate, so you wire this part onto the wall, put the little cover on, and then this can clip and unclip very easily. You can see there's various terminals here to connect onto the back plate, and also a battery compartment. And that's because even though this is a wired thermostat, the remote thermostats are still battery powered. Which may seem a little bit counterintuitive, but in a lot of situations, you're wired, even if your thermostats are hardwired back to the boiler, they aren't necessarily mains powered. Sometimes they are, but on other times what you'll have is a wired thermostat on the wall or wired heating programmer that just has a permanent live and a switch live connected to it with no neutral, and the thermostat is still battery powered. I think it kind of goes back to the days where you just have a traditional completely analog thermostat on the wall, and that obviously wouldn't require mains power. So they just are designing thermostats to kind of work with those older systems, which makes complete sense. The battery life should be completely fine, and it just makes this a lot more flexible to install onto all sorts of different systems. So yeah, this is battery operated, and the battery compartment is just behind here if you ever need to change it. And I like what they've done here with where the piece that actually goes onto the wall has this nice little sort of cover that hides all the wiring. So when you're taking this off the walls to change the batteries, you're kind of completely safe. There's no exposed wiring that you could easily touch when it's off the wall. So that's quite a kind of nice way of doing it. So that's the thermostat off the wall. You take that away and then wire this back plate onto the wall to replace your existing thermostat. So what we'll do now is we'll open up this little screw, take a look at the wiring, and then we'll talk about it. So with that cover unscrewed, we can simply lift it off, and under here we can see the terminals. So I'll roughly go through what these mean and how you connect this, but I'm not going to make a complete sort of novice's guide to wiring heating controls. Realistically, this is a completely easy thing to do yourself if you understand the basics of heating controls and the basics of how to work safely with mains electricity. If you're a complete novice, don't attempt this yourself, get a proper installer in. It's definitely cheaper to get a professional installer in than trying to do this yourself and breaking your boiler because you did something wrong. So I'll go through the basics, talk about how I'm going to connect this up, but if at any point you have any doubts about what to do or you're unsure, please consult a professional. Don't just blindly try it yourself. Also, what's very important here is don't blindly copy any wiring that I show in this video. When it comes to heating controls, there's no real standard for wiring colours. Wires can kind of be any different colour. You'll get, if it's twin and earth, you'll have blue and brown wires. If it's 3-core cable, you'll have brown, grey and black cables. If you've got older wiring, you'll have even different colours. And those wires tend to get used for all different things when it comes to heating controls. So don't just blindly match the colours up that I do in this video, thinking they'll work for your system. When you're wiring it up, you really need to understand which wires are your neutral, which are your permanent live, which are your switched live, and connect them up based on the wire's functions, not just what I show in this video. The simplest thing to do is when you take your old thermostat off the wall, look at what wires are wired into it and into what terminals and label them up. You can even use the included labels for that. And also just take photos of literally everything. I'll probably mention this again later in the video because it's so important. Take photos of your old programmer before you disconnect it. And that way, if you get stuck, you can either refer to the photo to work out how to connect this, or you can at least put it back to how it was before so you're not completely stuck without heating. So that's a bit of a disclaimer there, but what we'll now do is we'll talk about the terminals on this, and then we'll go away and talk about getting it installed. So on this, you have your main relay contacts, and this is for general on-off control, and that's what we'll be using in this video. So this is to basically replace a standard thermostat where it will physically switch the boiler on and off by switching a live wire to the boiler. So it's just a standard relay, so you have your common connection, your normally closed and normally open, and that's kind of also shown on this diagram. So when the heating is off, the common terminal is connected to normally closed, and when the heating turns on, the common connection will instead connect to normally open. It's just a switch that connects either these two terminals together or these two terminals together. So what you'll usually end up doing is into your thermostat, you'll have your permanent live wire and your switch live, And what you would do is you connect your permanent live into common and your switched live into normally open, and that's generally all you need to control your boiler. But of course there's a lot of differences, so make sure you understand your system. In addition to that, there's these three terminals here labelled P1, P2 and P3, which are described as parking. And essentially all these are terminals that don't connect to anything. But it's still actually a really nice thing to have on this, and I really like to see it. Because for example, as I mentioned, this doesn't require a neutral wire because it's battery operated. However, if your old thermostat did have a neutral wire, what you can do is you can take that leftover neutral, screw it into one of these parking terminals just to keep it safely terminated somewhere. Likewise, this doesn't need any kind of earth wire to it. It's a double insulated class 2 device. It doesn't need earth. But if you've say got an earth wire in the wall coming out the cable going to your thermostat, you can wire it into one of these parking terminals just to terminate it safely out of the way. So that's really, really nice to see, because it just means you can kind of get them neatly out of the way. You're not trying to just either leave bare wires hanging in the wall or put connector blocks on it and have connector blocks floating around. You can put any of those extra wires into these parking terminals just to keep them out of the way. The final terminals we see here are these three here labelled analog/digital. I won't be going into full detail on this video, but these are used if you want to use a digital or an analog modulating control connection to your boiler. So whereas the on-off relay control we're doing here, all that can do is turn your boiler on and turn it off. These controls here are more advanced and allows Tado to control the actual temperature of the water in your heating loop. So it means that if it's a really cold day, it's really cold inside and you want the room to heat up very quickly, Tado can tell the boiler to make that water in the radiators really, really hot. Or if you only need to maybe raise the temperature a tiny little bit, it'll run the water through the radiators at a much cooler temperature to increase the heat in the room a lot more gradually. This allows your boiler to be much more efficient, and it also prevents temperature overshoot. So it stops that situation you've probably experienced where your room gets too cold and the heating turns on and you feel it get really hot and then it turns off again and you feel it get really cold again and you feel those temperature fluctuations. Using these modulating analog and digital controls can allow you to very much alleviate that. They're very, very good to have. A common type of this control you've probably heard of before and I've covered on my channel is OpenTherm. That's a kind of standardized protocol available across a lot of different boilers that you can use with Tado and lots of other thermostats to control your boiler with modulation. So these terminals here can be used for OpenTherm. But what's really cool with Tado is it also supports other protocols. Because while OpenTherm is a standard, and the idea of a standard is that all boiler manufacturers support it, not all boilers do. And with a lot of thermostats, if you buy an OpenTherm thermostat, if your boiler doesn't support OpenTherm and instead uses its proprietary digital bus protocol, you're just completely stuck. You can't use it. But what's really nice with Tado is it actually supports a bunch of different bus protocols from a bunch of different boiler manufacturers. So say for example, you've got a Valent boiler, they don't support OpenTherm. I think there's a couple of countries they do where OpenTherm is mandated in those countries' regulations, but in the UK, a Valent boiler doesn't support OpenTherm. It uses their proprietary e-bus protocol. But with Tado, you can actually configure it to use that bus. So you can get modulating controls on a lot of different brands of boilers that normally don't support OpenTherm. So that's really, really nice to see. It also supports analog modulation control. This is something I've never really come across in practice, but it allows you to kind of connect an analog voltage into the boiler and the thermostat control the boiler's water temperature that way. Now, unfortunately with my system here, I won't be able to use this, and that's because I have the two separate heating zones. When you have two heating zones, the way that works is the thermostats don't actually control the boiler directly. Instead, they control a pair of zone valves, which are installed in my case above the boiler, and when mains power is applied to those valves, the valve opens to allow water to flow to that heating zone, and then inside the valve itself is a little micro switch, and when the valve fully opens, that switch is triggered, and it's that switch there that turns the boiler on. So what actually happens here is essentially these thermostats turn the valves on, and then the valves turn the boiler on. So unfortunately with my setup here, I can't really use OpenTherm or any other kind of digital bus. In my case, it would be OpenTherm because it's an ideal boiler. I can't really use that because even though I would run a digital connection between this and the boiler, there would then be nothing in place to connect the zone valves up and control them. If in the future I did want to use OpenTherm, essentially what I would need to do is either get rid of the zone valves or just lock them permanently open, install a TRV on the radiator in this room to give it its own zone control, and then I would just use a single Tado wire thermostat into the boiler over OpenTherm and it would give me modulating control. I'm not going to do that for this video just because that would involve me basically doing a complete rewire of my heating system. It would be way overcomplicated for this video, and it means that people who are trying to follow this video to work out how to install Tado themselves would kind of be completely thrown off by me going on a tangent and changing my heating system. So instead I'm going to wire it for on-off control, just to do a nice simple direct swap, and then in the future we'll worry about modulation control. I might use OpenTherm with this, or equally I'm potentially looking at adding weather compensation to my boiler, and that would also allow modulation, so I might end up just going down the weather compensation route. I might do future videos on it, we'll see. But yeah, if you've not got multiple heating zones, you've just got a simple combi boiler with a single thermostat connected to it, it's definitely worth researching more into the idea of using OpenTherm or some other sort of digital control mechanism instead of using the on-off control. It's a fair bit of additional work and it's a more advanced topic, but it's definitely worth looking into for a more sort of comfortable and more efficient experience. But just to keep things simple, we're just using the on-off control contacts with the relay contacts for this video. So that was a look at the wired thermostat and how you're going to connect it all up. What we'll now do is we'll get the other wired thermostat out and go through the initial setup process to get these set up, connected to the app, and then we'll get them installed. And then once we've got it all installed and up and running, then we'll go through and install all the radiator valves. Okay, so now it's time to get all this set up and working. Now in terms of the instructions I'm following, I'm actually following the instructions for the sort of standard home user instructions. I initially went for the professional installer instructions just for something a bit quicker because I'm fairly familiar with heating controls, but this one seems to be very much geared up for if you're say an electrician or a house builder that's installing this, where you'd install this without setting up any of the app, just setting it up as a basic in-room thermostat and then expecting the homeowner to come along later and pair it to their app. Whereas the more homeowner installation guide like this one, it's a bit easier and it also covers it more through the process of setting up with the app. So I'll follow these instructions because it means I can get them all installed and set up with the app in one go, rather than needing to sort of set it up as a standard thermostat and then worry about pairing it to the app. So I've already got the app set up here and working, and I've already created an account. So we're going to press add device, and it's going to ask me to scan the QR code on the bottom of one of the devices. And in this case, we're going to start with the internet bridge. So I'll scan this off camera, so we'll scan the QR code on it. And that has now discovered the internet bridge, and it's showing up in the app. So we'll press register device. Okay, so the first thing it's now doing is asking me to connect the internet bridge to my network. So I'm going to plug a network cable into the internet bridge and then into the rest of my network. So we'll just plug that in like that and then press continue. Definitely very much hold your hand here. And the next step is connect a power supply to the internet bridge. So I've got a micro USB cable here. I'm using the Tado power brick, it's just the cable here wasn't long enough. Although equally, you could even use any other USB port. Even if you say you've got a router with a built-in USB port, you could plug it directly into that for power. So plug that in there and wait for it to start up. So we can see power lights come on, router lights blinking and now gone solid, and a little cloud light there which will presumably indicate that it's connected to Tado servers once it connects. So we'll wait for that to connect up. And as you can see, the app now says your internet bridge is connected. So we'll press continue, and the internet bridge is now registered. Okay, so now with the internet bridge set up, what we now need to do is activate pairing mode, which will let us pair all the other devices such as the thermostats. So we'll press activate pairing in the app, press OK there, and as you can see the pairing light's now flashing on the internet bridge itself. Alternatively, you can also do that by just holding this pairing button down until the light starts blinking, so you can do it outside the app as well. So what we now need to do is pair the thermostat. So to do this, first of all, we're going to go back out here, we're going to just go through the process of setting up the thermostat in the app directly, just to keep things following the process exactly. So what we're going to do is press add device again, add device, and scan the QR code on the back of the thermostat. So scan that QR code, find the device, press register device, and it'll then take us through the process of telling us how to power up the device. So we're going to press continue. Well, so it says to take out the back plate and pull the battery tab out, so we'll do that. Take the battery tab out. And now if you look at the thermostat, that will then boot up. Press continue. It says to put it into pairing mode, so to pair it we need to hold the button down for 3 seconds. This is already in pairing mode, so hopefully they should just pair automatically. So hold that down there for 3 seconds. There we go, that's now in pairing mode. And hopefully these two devices should then pair to each other. There we go, now it says that your device is connected. Press continue, shows they're now connected. And now what it's going to do is take me through all the installation instructions. So it's added the app, we can see it here. It's also nice there's even a blink display button so you can actually identify a particular device by pressing blink display, and in theory this one will say hi on it, there we go. So if you don't know which thermostat's which, you can kind of use that to identify them. But now that's installed, if you want to then follow the installation instruction for this particular device, you can go into the device, pick installation instructions, and it actually quite nicely shows you how to go through it. This is the first time I've seen this, but actually it's quite nice. It actually lets you kind of even search for an existing thermostat and see instructions for how to replace your existing thermostat. That's pretty nice. So yeah, that's that thermostat now paired up and working. So what we'll now do is we'll jump over to my existing thermostat and take a look at how we're going to replace it. And with that, we're now ready to replace my existing room thermostats with the Tado ones. We'll do all that and then we'll connect up all the smart TRVs. So before I've started this video, I've already made sure I've completely isolated power to the heating system and the thermostats. I'm not going to go into full detail of how you should be doing that. If you're doing this sort of project and you don't know how to isolate power to your heating system, get in a professional. You do need to know how to do this safely, but I've already safely isolated the power to the heating system. In my case, I just need to turn off the circuit breaker, but lots of different heating systems are different. Some are fed off of existing circuits. You need to use some sort of fuse spur to turn them off. You just need to be careful here. So what we now need to do is take this existing thermostat off the wall and install a Tado. So again, there's various thermostats. On this one, there's a little screw on the bottom, or a little tab on the bottom you need to get with a screwdriver. So we'll just push that tab in to unclip it, which worked completely fine before I started filming, and now won't come off. There we go, that's it. And then with that there, it'll hinge up, and you can actually just lift the actual thermostat completely off. So yep, we'll take that off there. Then you see here, the model here is a Danfoss TP1. So if you're replacing this with something similar, that's the model I have here. And then behind here, we can see the existing wiring. And like the Tado, this particular programmer is again wireless. So it just has another battery in the back of it. So this is actually a completely direct swap. It's literally the exact same wiring into this, into the Tado. If, like I mentioned earlier, your existing programmer had, say, a neutral going to it because it's a mains powered programmer, it would be very similar setup. You'd have your live, your switch, your permanent live, your switch live, and then some sort of neutral, which would either be blue or some other colour, hopefully sleeved up blue. You just need to look at your existing terminals. Now, before we even go in and touch this, we're once again going to make sure this is completely isolated using proper test equipment. Do not do this if you don't even have equipment. Check that you have safely isolated it, because hiring someone in to do this is still going to be cheaper than giving yourself an electric shock and all the problems that come from that. So yeah, this is definitely dead, so it's now safe to work on. So now take a closer look at my existing programmer. We can see the wiring is actually labelled basically identically to on the Tado. We have common, normally closed, normally open. There's these other two contacts here that are, I don't know what they're for something custom for this thermostat, they are not used. So all we need to do is basically transfer the common terminal, which will be the permanent live, and then normally open, which will be the switched live, over to the Tado. Some thermostats will be a bit different. Some of them, instead of actually labelling them common, normally closed, normally open, they'll just give them like numbers or letters, and you'd have to kind of match them to the manual. In that case, hopefully what you'll also get is a diagram like this, like it shows on the Tado, and in which case you can kind of go from this diagram. If it kind of shows a line, it'll show a line away from common, and then if it shows a sort of line that's pre-formed, that would go to normally closed, and then if there's a sort of open point, that would indicate normally open. So you may not have the actual normally open, normally closed, but you'll have some sort of diagram, hopefully. And of course, if you can't figure it out, get in a professional. I'm going to say this a lot throughout this video. If you get stuck, get a professional in. But yep, so now we figured this out, so we know the brown wire is common, and then the black wire, which is just over-sleeved with some brown sleeving, that is normally open. So what I now need to do is get this old programmer off the wall and get the Tado installed instead. So of course, when it comes to installing this, all we need to do is take the back plate. I've already taken off the old protective cover. We'll screw this up to the wall. Helpfully, of course, the original plugs do not line up with the new Tado. That's very helpful, but we'll just have to move these plugs, get some sort of fixing in for it, and wire it in. Also, as we can see, the wires are kind of just coming out the wall, but actually there is a 3-core and earth cable sort of with the remaining terminals kind of buried inside the wall. Just for sort of neatness and overall, I don't know, tidiness, professionalism, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Pride in your work, I don't know. I'm not going to leave these wires coiled up in the wall. I'm going to bring them all out and put them into the parking terminal, just get it nice and neat. But you could just basically swap these on, but I'll get the other wires that are kind of loose in the wall and I'll get them all neatly put into here properly. So what I'll do, I'll go away off camera, get these plugs moved so I've got sort of a good fixing for the Tado. I'll get these wires tidied up and then we'll get it connected up. Okay, so what I've actually decided to do here is I've taken out the original plugs, which are just these standard sort of self-drilling plugs. And the difficulty is going to be is that the screw holes in the Tado are not far off the distance of these, they are a bit closer together. So if I try and put another one of these plugs in, because this is what I would probably use for this sort of thing, it would be so close to one of these existing holes, it would probably just crumble and not really hold properly. But what's very convenient with the Tado is the screw holes on the back plate will line up perfectly with a standard UK back box. Annoyingly, the old programmer has screw holes that would also line up with the back box, but there was also other screw holes, and they of course decided to use the screw holes that didn't line up with the back box. So what I'm going to do instead of trying to screw the Tado directly to the wall, I'm going to cut out a bit of plasterboard here and install a dry lining box. That way I can then screw the Tado directly into this. It'll just make for a much neater finish, rather than trying to just put more of these self-drilling plugs in. So yeah, I'm going to cut a bit of the wall out, put a back box in, and we'll screw the Tado to it. So as you can see, I've now cut out the wall to match the size of the back box. So what we now do is put the back box in over all the existing wires, get them all through into the box, ideally along with the outer insulation on the cable. So get that all into the box, get the box into the wall and clip it in. And then that'll just give a much nicer, neater overall finish, having that box in the wall like that. So we can now screw the Tado into that, and that'll just look and work a lot better. So yep, that's now all in there. So what we can now do is get the Tado backplate installed. So what I'll do is, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to terminate all these, including the CPC or earth, and then the grey wire into Tado's parking connectors, just have them a bit neater than kind of have them all bunched up in the box in, you know, either disconnected or in terminal blocks. So we're going to put the Tado backplate on. So we've got that here. We've got a couple of M3.5 screws to put it on. Obviously these aren't included. It comes with screws to fix it straight to a wall, but for back box you just need the M3.5 screws. So we're going to put that over the wires again, like that. Line up with the back box. Thankfully, yep, that lines up absolutely fine. And then just put the screws in. So get one screw into that side, one screw in for the other side, get it all screwed back and level. It's nice it's got that little slotted bit there so you can kind of adjust the level, which is good. So we'll get these in, get it screwed back, and then we can make the connections. And there we go, that's the Tado backplate now installed. I ended up putting a washer behind each of the screws just because the screws had quite small countersunk heads and they were sort of burrowing through and deforming the plastic, so that makes it a bit more secure, and that's now completely level, which is great. So now we need to do the connections. So as we saw before, with my particular setup here, the brown wire is the common or the permanent live, the black wire is the switch live, so that'll go into normally open, and then the grey is unused, as is the CPC. So these two will just go into the parking terminals. But again, your wiring can be different, the colours can all be switched around, so go based on what your old programmer was wired with, and actually ideally understanding the actual wiring of your system. Don't just blindly copy what I've done here because it could be different for your system. Also make sure when you're doing it, you don't blindly copy the ordering on the terminals on your old thermostat. It's very easy to kind of go, oh, brown was on left and black was on right or something, but you can have a situation where the terminals are switched up into a different order, a different position between your thermostats, so make sure you actually go off the actual designations of the terminals, not just the position or something like that. So yeah, let's get these wires in, and then we'll almost be done. And with that, the wiring's now all completed. So the brown now goes into common, and then black goes normally open, which is the same as the old thermostats. That's the relay contacts trigger the boiler via the zone valve, and then the spare CPC and spare grey core I've just put into the parking terminals just to keep them neat. You don't really want these things sort of floating around inside the wall loose. Especially if your previous thermostat was, say, mains powered and therefore it's got a neutral wire to it, that's the sort of thing you'd put into the parking terminals. So all we need to do now is get the little protective cover installed. You don't want to put the backplate on too tight. If you screw that to the wall too tightly, it might warp and then this cover doesn't go on, so just put it on reasonably tight, but don't over tighten it. Get a little cover on, tighten that up. I really like that protective cover, it makes it really nice for changing batteries. You're completely safe doing that with the power on, which is nicely designed, so that's now going to go on there. And then all we need to do is take the thermostat and put it on the back plate. So that should just clip on like that. There we go. That's now installed. So there we go, that's the first Tado thermostat now installed. So of course what we now need to do is go away and install the other one. So this was the one that was in my office. I'm going to install the other one downstairs. It will be the exact same process. I'm not going to show it on camera. All I'm going to do is go into the app, press that on another device, scan the barcode, add it into the app, pair it to the hub by taking the battery tab out, doing the exact same thing I did here, put it onto the wall downstairs, and then with that we'll have both thermostats installed and be ready to control the heating. So I'll go away, get the other thermostat installed, and we'll come back once it's up and running. And with that, we now have both thermostats now installed. The one downstairs was exactly the same process. The only difference I found was that whereas this one just had nothing behind it, the one downstairs had a wooden batten across that was obviously designed to mount a metal back box to. So even though the thermostat was just screwed to the wall with the same plugs as up here, there was a wooden batten behind it. So instead of using a dry lining box, I used a metal box. And then the only difference based on that was that rather than connecting the CPC to one of the parking terminals, I connected it into the terminal on the back box just to ensure that the box was earthed. But other than that, it was the exact same process. And with that, both thermostats are now up and running in the app. So now if we take a look here inside the app, we can see we now have both rooms set up. So we have two rooms there, one there and one there. Interesting, they're both flagging, one was flagging open window detected. I think it's probably just because it's just been set up, so I'll just cancel that, there we go. It's also next to a drafty door, so it might just be that. But yeah, we now have two rooms set up. So we have room 1 and room 2, both set up and ready to go. So with that, we now have both thermostats now installed. All I need to do now is rename them. So I can go in settings, rooms and devices, pick each room and rename the thermostat. So I just want to work out which thermostat's in which room. So I'm going to pick one of them, press blink display, and yep, we can see that's the one in this room here because that's now blinking high. So we know that's the right room, that's room 1. So room 1 is this room. Go into room settings, room name, and just rename that to what this room is. This is bedroom 3. Like that. There we go. And then we can now rename room 2 to downstairs hallway. Like that. So now we have both rooms now renamed, and now on the main screen here they now clearly show what room they're in. And with that, everything works. So now we have two different rooms and go and change the bedroom 3 temperature, downstairs hallway temperature through these two thermostats. And with that, the smart heating is now up and running. And with Tado, you could just stop there and use these as smart thermostats in this current state, and it would work fine. But what we can now do is add the radiator valves. But that's the beauty of Tado, is you can just install it just like this, use it like this, and then add the radiator valves down the line. You don't need to invest in it all at one go. But yeah, what we'll now do is we'll go and take a look at installing those radiator valves. So the next step is to now install all the smart radiator valves. So here's one of the packs I've got here. This is a quad pack, so it comes with 4 valves. They come in multiple different sort of versions of the multi-pack. You can either buy them individually, I think packs of 2, packs of 3, packs of 4. So it really just depends when you're buying them, work out how many valves you need, and then buy the appropriate multi-packs, whatever combination works out cheaper for you. Because I have 12 radiators that I want to put valves on here, I've got 3 4 packs of valves, but equally you don't even need to do it all up front. You could very easily just start off just with a wall thermostat or just put valves on a couple of radiators and add more as time goes on. So if we open the box up, we'll see we have the valves. So we have 2 TRVs on the top, the other 2 will be underneath, so that's the radiator valves there. And then we also, on top of that, you get, oh, that's a bit fallen off. And then you see each valve comes with a sort of mounting bracket pre-installed. And then you also get these little bags of other adapters and sort of thread adapters and pegs and things like that. I'm fortunate here that the TRVs just fit directly onto my radiators, but if you had any little issues about things not lining up, threads not fitting, stuff like that, they come with all these adapters to kind of let you adapt this to whatever radiator valves you already have. So yeah, it's pretty good. It comes with this, just it gives you complete flexibility, so no matter what sort of TRVs you already have on your radiators, you should be able to get Tado to fit. And the great thing is because all you're doing is actually swapping the head on the radiator valve, you're not actually changing the valve itself. There's no plumbing involved, there's no touching water, you don't need to drain your heating system. All you need to do is literally just swap the valves out. Dead easy process, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. So before we do that, what we'll do is we'll just pair one of the valves up to the hub. You're probably best pairing it and then installing it on the radiator, just because the QR code you need is already on the bottom of the valve. So it makes sense to do it kind of before you've installed it on the radiator. So to do this, it's a very similar process to when we paired all the other devices. First of all, we're going to need to make sure the internet bridge is in pairing mode. It isn't right now because it's now the next day, so it's gone out of pairing mode. It stays in pairing mode for about 12 hours. So I'll press activate pairing again, and that's now back in pairing mode, and the internet bridge is now blinking away, showing that it's in pairing mode. So yep, that's now in pairing mode. We can now pair the radiator valve. So very similar process to before. We're going to go back, press add device, and then scan the QR code on the bottom of the valve. Like that. So now it's found the valve, going to press register device, and it'll give you some instructions on what you're to do. So it tells you to take the bottom bracket off, which I've already done, press continue, pull the battery tab out, because on the bottom there's a little battery tab, so we'll take that out of the bottom of the radiator valve. That's now removed, and we should then see the radiator valve will start to, well, it made a noise there, it sort of vibrated, so the valve is now on, and now we need to hold in the pairing button on the bottom of the valve for 3 seconds. So to do that, we're just going to take the radiator valve, find something, finger should totally do it, and then hold the button down on the bottom for 3 seconds, and we should get 3 dots on the front. There we go. It's quite hard to see on camera because it's not a very bright screen and it's under very bright lights here, but it's now got some LEDs going along on the front, barely coming across on camera. It's perfectly bright in real life. These are just very bright video lights it's under right now. So that should now be pairing. So I'll just let that sit and pair, and hopefully in a second the app will find it. And with that, it's now paired. It did initially fail the first time with an error code of E0. Tried it again the second time, it failed again with the same error. But then I read the instruction, it actually did say quite clearly in the instructions, almost in bold, saying, make sure that when you're pairing, it's at least 3 meters and at maximum of 8 meters away from the hub. So because I had the internet bridge literally next to it, that might have actually been to do with the issue, because it failed a couple of times sitting here. I then walked away and stood in the next room with it, and it paired first time absolutely perfectly. So there's just like to bear in mind, if you are pairing it and you do find that you get that error, just make sure you aren't right next to the hub, because that did seem to actually cause the issue here, and it did mention that in the instructions. So yep, that's now paired, so it now says it's connected. Then from here, you can go into the installation instructions, and it'll give you nice instructions on how to install the radiator valve. Now, I'm not going to do that, follow those instructions myself, just because I know exactly how to put one of these in. So what we'll do now is we'll jump down to radiator and show how I'm going to install this. At this point, you may also get an error displayed in the app, and like maybe a little error symbol on the valve itself. It shows like a little spanner showing it's almost like a sort of service kind of symbol comes on. What I found is that in this state, it's just because it's not currently installed on a radiator, and it can't sense a connection between this and then the valve itself on the radiator. Once it's installed, it does a kind of automatic calibration process, and then it kind of accepts it's on a radiator, and then that error goes away. So if you see an error at this point when it's not installed on the radiator, don't panic, get it on the radiator, and hopefully that error will just go away. But yeah, let's go and get this installed. So the next step is to get the TRV installed onto a radiator. This process is probably fairly similar for most radiators, but there can be slight variations. So if it's slightly different with yours, you might just need to figure it out, check the instructions, or maybe use those adapter things it comes with if you can't get it to fit. So changing the TRV is actually a very simple process, because you don't actually need to touch any of the plumbing. If you've got an existing radiator valve like this, all you need to do is unscrew it with a little thread on the bottom. It's very easy to do by hand. You don't want to be undoing the actual proper nuts on the valve, because that will actually take the valve off and water will go everywhere. But with that unscrewed, the valve will literally just lift off. And as a bit of an aside, the way these TRVs work is extremely simple. The actual valve on the radiator itself just has this little button on it that is just pushed up and down by a little plunger inside the valve. So these sort of standard, just traditional analog TRVs, all they do is just have some sort of mechanism of physics and science inside that just pushes a little pin up and down on that based on the temperature in the room, and that's how it keeps the radiator open or closed. It either closes the radiator by pushing that down, or it lifts up to keep it open. So you're not touching any plumbing at this point, you just need to take this valve off and put the new one on. Now of course, to do this as a direct swap, it does mean that your radiator needs to already have some sort of TRV installed. So if you already do, great, just very easy swap like we're going to do here. If on the other hand your radiator doesn't have a TRV and you want to put a Tado TRV on it, that's more of a plumbing task, because you need to replace the sort of lock shield valve, which is just the same sort of idea but doesn't have this little button for the TRV. You need to replace this valve with one that's suitable for a TRV, and that's obviously a bit more plumbing. You're dealing with water, you're going to have to like potentially drain down your heating system and stuff like that. It is a completely possible task to do DIY, but if you're not confident with plumbing, it's the sort of thing you'd probably want to get a plumber in for. The only other thing to bear in mind is sometimes a radiator doesn't have a TRV intentionally. First of all, if the radiator is in a room with an existing thermostat on the wall, you then generally will not have a TRV on the radiator, because what you don't want is a situation where the radiator valve closes off the radiator before the thermostat on the wall has turned off. But you can get to a situation where the radiator itself's turned off, it's not producing any heat, the room's not getting any hotter, and then the thermostat on the wall is still telling the boiler to fire. So generally, if you've not got a TRV, it's usually because there's some sort of room thermostat already in that room. Additionally, generally speaking, you'd also want to have at least one radiator on your heating system or in a heating zone that doesn't have a TRV on it. That's because if the heating's running and all the TRVs are closed off, you don't want a situation where the boiler has literally nowhere to pump the water. You want to have at least one radiator that's always open so the boiler has a clear path to pump water through it. You do get modern pumps and boilers that have bypass valves or systems or technology that can detect if there's no water flow and they'll then shut off. But if you don't know if you've got a boiler or pump that has that sort of technology, the risk there is that you end up closing all your radiator valves off, having nowhere for your boiler to pump the water, and that could then cause damage to your boiler or your pump. So if you don't have an existing TRV, you can definitely fit them, but just be careful and make sure that if you're fitting a TRV onto a radiator that doesn't already have one, there's not a good reason that it doesn't already have one. But yep, so that's the old TRV now removed. It's all the new Tado one, very simple. Got a little bracket here. All we need to do is screw that onto the radiator valve itself. Obviously, if this thread doesn't line up or the little push pin doesn't fit or anything like that, you need to go through these little adapters in the box and try and figure it out. The instructions go into a lot more detail showing exactly how you can install those little adapters. So, we're going to screw that on there, like that. Get that all the way down. And then there's this little thing here that says top on it, which is slightly weird terminology because obviously if it was mounted horizontal or sticking out from the radiator, then top would make sense, but it's kind of front more. What this defines is where the little screen on the radiator valve will point. So I'm going to point that out forward into the room because that's kind of where I want to be able to see that screen. You don't want that pointing towards the back because then you'll never be able to see the screen on the Tado. And then with that, all we need to then do is get that tightened on nicely, take the Tado TRV, line it up with the radiator valve, like that, and then turn it a tiny little bit clockwise until it stops, and that is now installed. You'll then see it has a few little symbol with some lights. You can hear the motor running inside it, and that's it now calibrating, figuring out how it's going to adjust the valve, and now it's showing a house, showing a temperature, and that little spanner has gone away from the symbol, and that error will have disappeared from the app. And that's how simple it is to install those radiator valves. So what I'll now do is I'll run around the house, get the rest of these valves all installed and set up in the app, and then we'll jump in quickly towards the end of the video, take a look at the app, take a look at it working, and talk about my thoughts. And with that, we now have all the radiator valves installed and set up and working. So as we can see in here, we now have all the different rooms listed. I've maybe added a few too many radiator thermostats, but we've now got all my rooms in here, and they're all working. Now you'll notice here that some of these temperatures are a bit higher than the 20-degree set point. That's just because the flow temperature of my boiler is set way too high currently, and I need to go and turn that down to avoid that overshoot. That's nothing to do with Tado, that's just my boiler overshooting. And the other thing I've noticed here is how much more consistent these room temperatures are between all the different rooms. With my previous system, all the rooms were very noticeably different temperatures, especially between downstairs and upstairs. When I measured it, upstairs was almost a good couple of degrees hotter than downstairs in many cases, and that was just because there was a single thermostat in the hallway controlling the entire house, and it just didn't give that consistency. Whereas with this, there's a bit of variation here and there, but the rooms are all much closer in temperature to each other, so that straight away has made a huge difference with Tado, and that's even with the boiler's flow temperature being too high. So it's definitely working really nicely to keep all the rooms at a consistent temperature. The other thing you'll notice here is that the downstairs hallway is set to a much lower set point than any of the other rooms. That's because the downstairs hallway is where the downstairs thermostat is, the actual wired thermostat, and therefore that room doesn't have any sort of radiator valve on that radiator. So that room gets heated up when any other room in the house is really calling for heat. The downstairs hallway also has the issue that whenever I open the front door, the thermostat gets a massive blast of cold air and then turns on. And I kept having that with the old programmer. When I would open the front door, the thermostat would click on very quickly and then heat the entire house, including all the rooms that had no impact from that open door. So what I've decided to try out here is I've set the downstairs hallway to a much lower temperature. It will still get heated when any other room in the house is calling for heat because that radiator doesn't have a TRV on it, so the downstairs hallway will still get heated, but it means that if I open the front door and the thermostat gets a bit cold, it won't then call for heat and start heating up unnecessarily. So we'll see how that goes. I need to tweak a lot of this over time, we'll need to figure out the schedule. Currently all these rooms just share the same schedule, but I might want to tweak that and kind of adjust things here and there, but that's sort of stuff that comes with time. In terms of setting schedules, it's pretty easy. You kind of go into a particular room, pick the schedule button, and then in here you can pick schedules. You can pick your schedule days if you want to have just one schedule for each day, or you want different schedules for each day. And then what you can do that this took a little file, well, you can then add different time blocks in, separate, have different times for different temperatures for different times throughout the day. And then what you can do is you can press this button in the top right here and copy the schedule to different rooms. So it took me a little while to find that option. I was thinking, wait, do I really have to set the schedule on every single room? But no, what you can do is you can set the schedule in a single room and then copy it to any other rooms that you want to mirror that schedule. So that works really well. However, after doing all that setup, there's one more step that needed to be done. By default, if you just assign all the radiator valves, set them all up, the radiator valves will work, but they won't be able to call for heat. So what I mean by that is if the main wired thermostats or wireless thermostats, if you're using that, turn your boiler on, the radiator valves will automatically adjust the flow to that radiator based on the temperature in the room. So they'll let water flow through the radiator until the room gets up to temperature, and then they'll turn that radiator off. But what they won't be able to do is if the room is too cold, a radiator valve in a particular room will not be able to turn your heating system on. So with that sort of setup there, the radiator valves would allow a room to have a maximum temperature, but the room could be colder than that and nothing would happen. So if you want to allow your radiator valves to call for heat, you need to assign them to a zone controller. So to do that, we're going to go in Settings, Rooms and Devices, and in here we see a list of all the radiator valves, and what we'll also see in here is the individual zone controllers. So we can see we have one smart thermostat in bedroom 3, and then in the downstairs hallway, which is here, we have another smart thermostat, which are the 2 wired thermostats we installed, and those are the zone controllers. In my setup here, the downstairs hallway thermostat is the one that controls all the radiators, and then the bedroom 3 thermostat only controls that room. In your house, it might be a bit different. You may, for example, have an upstairs zone and a downstairs zone, in which case your downstairs thermostat would control all the downstairs radiators, and the upstairs thermostat would be the zone controller for all the upstairs radiators. So what we need to do is we need to first of all note down the serial number of the thermostat that we want to use as the zone controller for each radiator. So in my case here, as I said, the downstairs hallway thermostat is the zone controller for all the radiators in the house. So the serial number of that ends in 920, that's all we really need to remember is 920. And what we now need to do is go into each of the smart thermostats. I've already done this, so it's already set up, but go into each room, so not the thermostat itself, but pick the room itself, so say living room. And down the bottom here, there's an option for zone controller. As default, that's set to no zone controller independent. So that would mean that that room cannot call for heat. So instead what you need to do is go into each of your rooms and pick the zone controller for that room. So in my case, it's the one that ends in 920. So I pick that for each of these rooms, and that then means that if, say, the living room, which is this room here, gets too cold, that radiator valve will sense that, it will allow flow to that radiator, and then it will also trigger the room controller to turn the thermostat on. So with the setup here, what that now means is if, say, the living room, which is this room we're looking at here, if the living room got too cold, the smart thermostat will open up water to the radiator, and it will also trigger the zone controller, which is the hallway thermostat, to turn on the boiler. And that will then allow the living room to heat itself up independently, basically allowing the living room to call for heat. So we just go through each of these rooms and assign every single one of these rooms to a zone controller. And this is where there's one limitation of Tado that I found, which wasn't something I was really aware of before. It's not a big deal, but it's something very important to bear in mind. And that is there's a limitation of the amount of rooms that you can set that can call for heat. And that limit is 10. So right now I've assigned 10 of these different rooms to have a zone controller. But if I went, say, into utility, which is another room, went zone controller and tried to pick one and save it, I'll get an error saying that max rooms reached. Circuit's already connected to the maximum number of rooms. And that basically says that I can't assign any more rooms to call for heat from that particular zone controller. It's a bit of a weird limit because it seems a bit kind of arbitrary, 10, don't know why it's really there. However, it does just mean that you can't have more than 10 rooms that are set to call for heat from a single zone controller. For my setup here, it's not really an issue because all I've done is for my utility room and downstairs toilet, those rooms can't call for heat. And that's absolutely fine. In fact, I almost wouldn't want, say, the downstairs toilet that doesn't really get much use. I don't really want a situation where the downstairs toilet gets a bit cold and fires up the entire heating system just to heat that one tiny little toilet. So it does just mean that when you're assigning these zone controllers, to use it sparingly. You kind of need to think, do you want that room to always stay at the set temperature, or do you want to have the set temperature be a maximum for that room, but allow the temperature of that room to potentially drop below that? If you're happy for the room temperature to drop below the set temperature and only heat up to the maximum set temperature when other rooms are already being heated, then you don't really need to assign a zone controller. However, if you want the room to always stay at the set point and you want the room to be able to specifically fire the boiler up just to heat that single room, then that's the sort of rooms you need to assign to a zone controller. So it's just important to bear in mind that limitation. Here it's not a big deal, but it is important to bear in mind, especially if you've got a really large property, bigger than mine, where you're going to want that additional control. The final thing that's worth demonstrating here is where you're going to assign multiple devices to a single room. By default, when you add a device to Tado, it creates its own room, but in the case of, say, my kitchen dining area, that has 2 separate radiators in it, each with its own thermostat. So what I've done here is I've assigned both of these thermostats to the same room. All you do is go into the thermostat itself, and you can just pick the room it's assigned to. And that then means that these show up as a single room on the main interface. So we can go into here, it shows up as a single room with a single temperature, and it just means that both radiators will be controlled together, and I think it'll probably average their temperature readings together. So that's kind of what you want to do if you've got multiple radiators in the same room. And with that, the setup works pretty well. The final thing I want to point out is that a few of the features in Tado are paid for features, and I just feel it's very important for me to mention. It's nothing completely major, but the following features require a subscription that I think is about £3.99 a month, or I think there's a discounted annual option. When you first install it, it gives you a 1 week, I think it's a 1 week trial of what they call Auto Assist, which is a paid for feature. That will then drop off after a week. So by default, you will get access to these features, but after that trial ends, these features will stop working unless you pay for the subscription. So obviously I want to be completely clear, given I'm giving my own opinion of this product, I want to be completely clear to show exactly what these paid features are, just so you know what to expect or what not to expect if you don't want to pay for the subscription. The first of such features is geofencing. So if we go into home here, by default on the free plan as standard, you get the ability to manually switch between home and away. Obviously if you're home, your heating will be on. If you're away, you can either have it turn your heating completely off, or you can kind of set it to have a lower setback temperature. However, if you want to use automatic geofencing, where Tado will track the location of your phone and turn your heating off when you go away from home and turn it on when you come home based on your GPS location, that is a paid for feature that requires Auto Assist. Likewise, the Energy IQ feature, that allows you to kind of monitor your energy use. I think you can tie it into potentially smart meters and stuff like that, or at least tie it into your energy tariff and use it to kind of measure your energy usage. That's also a paid feature, as is Care and Protect, that essentially allows Tado to look at how your heating system's performing. I suspect it uses sort of heuristics around like how fast rooms are heating up and how things are being triggered, and it'll kind of identify issues with your heating system and alert you. Again, this is a paid feature that requires Auto Assist. The final paid for feature is open window detection, where the individual thermostats can, I think just based on temperature changes in the room, can detect if a window's open or a door's open and will automatically turn off heating in that room. If you want that to happen automatically, again, that requires the Auto Assist subscription. However, it does still work manually free of charge. With that setup, you'll get a notification on your phone saying a window is open, and you can then manually go in and turn the heating off or turn it back on again. But you don't have that automatic feature without the Auto Assist subscription. Of course, it's entirely up to you whether you want to use that subscription or not. If you find those features useful, it may be worth it for you, but equally if you're not going to need those features, you probably don't need to buy the subscription. But I wanted to be completely upfront and demonstrate which features of these do require a subscription and which ones don't. Tado also have a page on their website that compares the subscription to the free version, so it's worth checking this if you're wanting more information on this. And with that, we have Tado up and running, and I'm very happy with it. The setup process was pretty easy, the hardware was very easy to install, and the app setup was pretty decent, and it gave you very good instructions on how to set everything up. There was a couple of places where the app maybe could have gone into a bit more information. In particular, at no point in the app did it tell me to pick a zone controller for each of the radiator valves. I kind of had to figure that out on my own, that I needed to do that. But other than that, it was very easy to get it up and running. All the hardware was very easy to install, and now it's up and running, it works really well. I'm already noticing the benefit of all different rooms kind of being at much more consistent temperatures, and I'm really looking forward to in the future being able to potentially adjust different rooms to kind of make the bedroom colder in the evening and things like that. So I'm really interested to try this out long term and see how much of a difference it makes having smart radiator valves on all my radiators. So yeah, hopefully you found this video interesting or potentially useful if you're trying to install this yourself. But all I have to say now is thank you very much for watching.